I want to let you know I'm so passionate to be here today. I have literally dedicated my entire career to driving innovation in media by leaning into the polycultural consumer across many different sandboxes, from comms planning, media planning, creative development. So I'm just so honored to be here today with everyone, especially coming off of the last chat. I mean, it was just so emotional and rich, and obviously a lot of action to be taken in terms of elevating, right, our underserved communities. So honored to be here today with everyone, but really, really honored to be here with Karla Davis and Eden Zeilo. Both Ulta Beauty and Shea Moisture are really paving the way within the beauty industry. And they're doing this by breaking down barriers specific for women of color, people of color, and most importantly, really creating platforms for these underrepresented voices to really break through. And both Karla and Eden are at the helm of this. So I just want to say thank you, ladies, for taking the time to sit in with us today. And I would actually, before we get into our specific topics for discussion, I'd love to just open it up really quickly to both of you to share a little bit about why you're so passionate to be here today and really just in your roles on these businesses.
Sure.
And I'll hand it over to you first, Karla.
Yeah, no, I will kick it off. Excited to be here. And I mean, to your point, Stacey, like having a chance to listen in on the last panel and just the continual conversations that we are all having on the value of all of us being able to be seen and valued, right? Like that's what's at the core of all of this, and the impact when that doesn't happen. And so I think that, to your point, coming into this space is so much about that in so many meaningful ways. So as you alluded to, I'm Karla Davis. I lead the integrated marketing and media business at Ulta Beauty. I've been there for the last 6 years, and it has been a core reason why I show up every day, right? Is to be able to have an impact in this space in a very real way, be able to change, the conversations that are happening in the most senior places and in the most important to our industry places as much as I possibly can, such that this becomes not a side thing, but core to what we think success looks like, core to what our work looks like, and ultimately core to what we do for our business. So I think that's a little bit of it.
Awesome. Eden?
Hi, everyone. I'm Eden, and I'm the Director of Global Brand Marketing at Shea Moisture, which is a Unilever brand. And for me, I'm really passionate about, just having ownership in the community, being seen, being valued, as Karla mentioned, and it's been so great just working on a brand that continually does that. The Shea Moisture story, was founded by a young entrepreneur who was an immigrant to America, who was, Richelieu Dennis, who was creating, his grandmother's recipes and selling them, on the streets before really growing this into a bigger business. So it was really one of the real American dream. And, as we continue to fight the good fight, and, we've done a lot of things as a company to really step up in terms of, helping us get to racial equity and close the wealth gap for minorities in America. And so for me, it's really exciting that, my values align and my passions are aligned with the work that I get to do every day.
I love that, Eden. I can't agree more. It's amazing. I mean, we're all in, just such wonderful positions to be able to take our personal experiences and inspiration, right, and drive change and impact within these communities. Thank you both for sharing that. Now that we have our juices flowing, I'm just going to quickly touch on our topics for today. I really want to lead with each one of the brand's purposes, right, and the intended impact on these communities. And then we'll shift over to really just, helping to drive education on the front of what is the gold standard in terms of reaching the Latinx and Black communities, and what are your experiences, right, as key marketers within the space through the lens of authenticity. And then obviously we want to touch on some of the beauty trends. I mean, we're coming off of a profound year, a lot of pivots and changes in 2020. And then we'll end with just personal inspiration of what it means to be in these positions. And I'm going to kick off with you, Karla, on the brand purpose front. I have to tell you, I mean, I've just been, personally, I'm a huge fan of Ulta Beauty, but I've been really moved over the past few years, but really coming into 2021 by the brand's commitment. And I'm specifically talking about the launch of Muse, which is also known for the audience as Magnify, Uplift, Support, and Empower. And this commitment is truly really elevating all women of color in one way or the other within the industry. So Karla, I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about that and the intended impact behind it.
Absolutely. This has definitely been a kind of a program, an initiative, a movement of my career, because it's allowed me to take some things that, back to even what Ian was saying, like things that are so personal to your life experience and your values, and really be able to put them in the forefront of your business, which you just, reality is there aren't often times and places when you can do that. So yeah, I mean, at the core of Muse is this idea of recognizing the impact of the voiceless, or those that have not gotten credit for their influence and their inspiration on a much larger industry. And that's really a lot about in this case, it was the Black beauty enthusiasts. I think, to your point, and back to purpose overall, like in the last couple of years, we have really doubled down on this idea that like Ulta Beauty is about possibilities. But being about possibilities means you have to acknowledge where there are barriers for people in being able to access those possibilities. And so when we started down this path, for Muse specifically, it was, hey, there is an insight here about a group of folks that have been at the forefront of driving change and innovation and inspiration that have not been given their due. So how do we use our position of power in order to do that? So it was one thing about creating communications that acknowledge the fact that we get that, but it also had to come, as we like to say, with receipts. About like what we're going to do because we get that, right? So yes, need the proof points, right? But it was like, hey, we can't just come out with a love letter to this group about how much we appreciate you and all these things without showing fundamentally how that's now impacting how we operate in our business. And so, really proud that we were able to launch this campaign, but not in a bubble. We launched it with very real business changing efforts, like, committing to doubling our Black-owned brands and doubling down on the amount of dollars that we're putting into media that talks to support or supported or is built by this audience and audiences of people of color, and ensuring that like when we start talking to this group, it's not just talk, but that it's walk as well. So, yeah, that has been a major part of what had, helps me get up every day, is knowing that like we are really trying to, make real impact in this space.
It's amazing when you're able to do that. And I have to tell you, I mean, looking at this proposition and just hearing you talk about it, I mean, it truly is coming to life. I mean, in every facet of your business, from your products, your services, to your marketing approach. And really, again, like we'll talk about what it means to truly be authentic later, but leaning into that. And on that front, I don't want to lose sight, Karla, of the fact that, I mean, Ulta has historically really been a key retailer, if not the key retailer, for many Black-owned brands. Some that pop up in my mind are Juvia's Place, Beauty Bakery. So I just love for you to talk about whether or not, all the work you guys have done in that space, was that really a guiding light in forming Muse? And if so, how has empowering those specific businesses really led to that commitment, and where you are today as a brand?
Absolutely. Because I mean, I think, when we think about the value of representation across all things, right? Like so much of that ultimately comes back to economic value and economic power, right? And that like a lot of times who's put in front is because of who has the influence, who has the power, and who has the dollars in order to do that. And so, as we are bringing in more of these Black-owned brands and seeing like what tends to be the hurdles or barriers for them to be sustainable, we have to look at the industry as a whole. And are there some barriers that are systematically set into space or spaces and places that create that? And if there are, what can we do as one of the biggest influencers in the space in order to go against it, you know? And so it's, how do we continue to give space and place for these? How do we ensure that there's infrastructure behind in a way that might be different than how we've built our business before? But if we are honest about like, hey, if the way we built some of the things we've done hasn't, you know, organically created this, maybe we need to rethink it, you know? And I've so appreciated the business wanting to have those kind of conversations, because it's uncomfortable sometimes, and it pushes people outside of their comfort zones. But in order to be authentic to, you know, wanting to grow businesses, we need to look at it pretty holistically and understand our role in it. So I definitely think that seeing and having those brands as a part of our portfolio has given us insight into how to think about like what our role needs to be in continuing to push that effort.
That's amazing. You know, and you kind of leaned into the authenticity piece. And I think it's a really great segue for you, Eden. When I think about Shea Moisture, I mean, that's literally the word that pops up in my mind. I mean, from the ingredients to the products and the brand mission, to your point, staying true to that, right? From its inception, made with love for you and your body. And I think today, more than ever, which is really just a function of what's really gone on in culture over the last year or so. But today, the brand has really shown up in a very authentic way to support its key communities during the social unrest of 2020, and specifically through the program of community commerce. So Eden, could you talk a little bit about that initiative through the lens of how it's impacting both the consumer and the marketer?
Sure. So at Shea Moisture, I mean, we've always talked about overserving the underserved consumer, and that has always been the Black and Brown community for us. We've also talked about the power of entrepreneurship and how that's really tied to our family roots and the roots of the brand. And we really believe in the power of entrepreneurship to close the racial wealth gap in communities worldwide. So we've done a lot of programming around supporting women of color entrepreneurs and African American entrepreneurs in the US and globally, but we now kind of went above and beyond in 2020. So I would say at the start of the pandemic, we launched a community commerce fund worth $1 million for Black-owned businesses. We noticed that Black-owned businesses were suffering at rates, you know, much higher than other demographics, and also had to deal with a lot of health implications as well due to COVID-19. And due to lack of access to, you know, the PPP loans that the government was giving, there wasn't really a financial infrastructure or resources for these businesses to thrive and really kind of bounce back after the pandemic. So we actually partnered with several organizations and launched this $1 million fund for Black-owned businesses. And throughout this program, we've been able to launch 20 programs. We got over 9,000 applications, and we've been able to support 100 businesses thus far. We're continuing to double down on our efforts this year. So you'll see a lot of upcoming funds in different spaces this year. We recently announced a $1 million fund for male entrepreneurs as well. So, you know, we've been pretty true to the female community, but we're now opening it up to male entrepreneurs and have a couple other things, you know, coming up. I would say definitely be on the lookout. We have more information on SheaMoistureFund.com if, you know, you're interested in learning more about the different fund and grants that we offer to Black and Brown entrepreneurs and what are the opportunities that are coming up.
That's an amazing proposition. I love the fact that you leaned into the commitment on the male front. Men need love too within this category. I know we always typically lead it to females, but that's amazing. And I do want to say, you know, obviously working on the Unilever business, I have to give a little bit of props there. Both Shea and Unilever as an organization are, you know, really coming together in the way of driving change. I think on the on the social justice front, in addition to driving skin equity. And I know there's so many different ways in which we are doing that. We have limited time today, so I'm not going to belabor that. But if there's anything else, Eden, you want to jump in on specifically to Shea and the commitment to skin equity, it would be great if you could touch on that.
Yeah, of course. I thought it was really important that, you know, when we saw all the social unrest happening last year, Shea Moisture again stepped up, and we actually launched a $100,000 fund for social activists. So going back to our proposition of supporting entrepreneurs, but also wanting to make social impact and change, we actually, you know, gave out grants worth of $20,000 each to 5 social activists, and are going to be partnering with them to kind of think through, you know, how can we make our communities safer for us. So I think that was another way that Shea Moisture SheaMoisture again stepped up and still stayed true to its mission of supporting entrepreneurs, but also making impact in the social activist space.
It's amazing. I realized that we're running a little short on time. So I know my next topic of discussion was really going to lean into marketing to Latinx and Black consumer, and we will get to that. But I do want to make sure that I don't lose sight of the fact that I have two beauty gurus with me today, and how important it is to recognize that, especially because of 2020 being such a unique year. I think we would all agree that there was immense social challenges that came into play, with the pandemic, and just the social unrest throughout the year holistically on so many different fronts. But I think with these challenges really came such amazing empowerment in the beauty space. And I don't want to lose sight of that, because so many consumers really did step up to the plate to either lead the way with DIYs, or, share their point of views of how they were managing, their care. Like two things that really bubbled up to the top for me was really this celebration of more natural forms of beauty. There was a lot of women, myself included, just going for more of the bushy eyebrow, the minimalist makeup look, but really leaning into self-improvement through those natural products. And then there was the other end of the spectrum, right? We saw a lot of consumers just really coming in and saying, you know what, this is my time to venture maybe into some new territory. I'm going to rock this Afro punk look. I'm going to go for that more extreme and bold eye or lip. And just really sparking a lot of creativity. So I do want to lightly touch on that. And Karla, just given like the breadth that Ulta Beauty has within the space, I'd love for you to talk about how during this time, right, during these changes of 2020, how the organization really stepped up to service the consumer, and how are you going to take these new forms of innovation moving into next year, keeping the consumer more center stage, if you will.
Sure, absolutely. So just a couple of thoughts on that, because I think there's a lot there. I think the first thing that we learned, and it's less of an innovation and more of a mindset shift, is how much beauty was tied to wellness and self-care, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that it was so much bigger and richer and deeper than I think we all often give it credit for, or that it's often given credit for in the marketplace. So I think that that's one thing that is just going to be a take on how consumers think about the beauty space, that we'll be able to take into the future and have license to really ensure that we talk about it in the way that it really impacts people's whole, their lifestyle and their life. And it's not just about like, products and color palettes. It's definitely that. And so I think that that's a big piece of it. What we really had to do and quickly pivot into, and that was like the word of 2020, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was to be less in some cases about selling stuff and more helping guide them on what to do with the stuff they have, and really becoming more of an advisor and a coach of how to best leverage what you have access to in any shape or fashion than I think we ever had been, and really kind of focusing on, other buzzword is content, but like storytelling and providing more value that is above and beyond product and promotion. And so I think that's also another thing as we think about moving into this next year and beyond, of where we are, continuing to go into as it relates to showing up for marketing, is how do we have more of a content forward conversation with our guest, and really create a relationship of like, we call ourselves girlfriend, to the beauty enthusiast on her journey and whatever it is he or she is doing in the beauty space, and how we can validate the depth of beauty to all of us, and then help and coach along the way.
I have to tell you, that's a marketer's dream come true, right? We're all working towards having that one-on-one relationship. So being able to lean into everything that happened and become that advisor, right? It really does. It changes the dynamic a little bit, Karla. So thank you for sharing those insights. And, Eden, on your end, you think about Shea Moisture and you think all natural, and just building on what Karla said, like on the self-improvement front, and how that really did bubble up to the top for consumers. can you share a little bit about how you were able to lean into that good for you, to Karla's point, like inside and out as a brand, and just your proposition and the fact that that is, I mean, those are literally your roots.
Yes, I think Karla touched on a lot of different points, and that, Shea Moisture also kind of followed. So we were very big on digital and very big around content. So for us, we saw beauty as being that space for self-care that was more affordable than, what people were typically doing in a pre-COVID world, right? So this was their moment to pamper themselves at home. Also, our community wasn't going to the hair salon anymore. So you were kind of forced to figure out, what am I doing with my hair? How can I give myself a facial? All of these different things, right? Some of us are faring better than others. But, we actually launched At Home with Shea, an influencer campaign where we partnered with influencers and had our products and talked about, okay, these are the usage cases, right? Like, sit down, take a shower, use our bath, scrubs, and, have wash day, and then also provide a lot of education on how to use our products. There's also just, I feel like our consumers are so curious and there's so much product out there. So what Karla said, it's not enough to just have a good product and, have a great promotion or great marketing campaign. You really have to provide education and teach them how to use these products and teach them how to use multiple products within your range, or and cocktail and DIY. And, are we masking once a week? Like, what are the best things for the consumer? So for us, I think that having this digital content was super important. What was also really nice is that we are a very experiential brand. So in a pre-COVID world, again, we used to do a lot of events. We used to be able to engage with our consumer one-on-one. And then we were able to turn that into virtual. And as someone that leads global brand marketing, it was great for me because now I could invite my global consumers to things that they would not have access to before. So actually going virtual made it much easier for people to feel more connected to the brand. They got to meet, who are the faces behind the brand, who are the influencers, learn more about the product directly from the brand. So it also just gave us a different level of brand voice within kind of the marketplace.
That's amazing. Brand voice, and it just really sounds like intimacy too, and just like taking that journey with them. And I do agree, everyone did fare differently. My hair is pretty long. I didn't master the haircuts myself. Just building on that, do you what are your thoughts in terms of, what's really going to carry forward? Eden, do you see this newfound, self-care continuing as we start to open back up and really just get back out there?
I do. I mean, I think that everyone has been stressed out during this pandemic. I think that everyone has kind of been really in tune with their bodies and are going to continue to focus on self-care and wellness. I think that we're going to start looking at, more holistic beauty. Some of the key trends that I see kind of continuing are really around ingestibles and vitamins kind of being the next thing that we look at. Male grooming is also really big. I know that we mentioned we're supporting male entrepreneurs. Male grooming has also been really big. And then also looking at sustainability, both in terms of like packaging, refillables, really just being like super conscious around that as well. The younger consumer, the Gen Z consumer does really care about that. So it's, going to force beauty companies to continue to innovate and making sure that not only is, what's inside your packaging good, but what is the packaging itself? How are you recycling? What are the things that you're doing? So I think all of those things will kind of continue in a post-pandemic world.
Yeah, that's, I think that's it's definitely a valid point in terms of, caring from the inside out. And I think holistically within our industry, we're going to see a lot of continuation in terms of, self-care and maybe just new tips and tricks, to be honest with you, that the consumer has learned over the last year. And then the fact that we do lean in so heavily, we're literally here talking about diversity and inclusion. Those are the culture shapers, right? And changers. So we should continue to see those trends really marching forward. I would love to take the opportunity now to talk a little bit about the gold standard of marketing. And I'll be completely frank and honest with the audience. There's constant optimization, right, needed on that front. And there's such a gap to be filled in when we think about that. And again, because our consumers really are culture shapers, I would say, it's more important today than ever to make sure that we're being innovative, right? And we're leaning into creativity within media. But for me, my personal experiences and what I'd love to talk about on this front is, what does it truly mean to be authentic to this consumer? And how do we really, I do want to stop for a moment and acknowledge that Karla has to unfortunately drop a little bit earlier. Karla, thank you so much for joining us today. Do you have any final parting words?
Yeah, no, I know. I'm like so sad. I'm like dropping in the chat. Like, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
I love these kind of conversations. And yeah, I will just kind of have one final shot on this one. And I think you guys have some additional conversation that could be really rich. But I think, you know, at the end of the day, when we think about like authentic, I think a lot of that has to be, you know, how do you understand what has been in the DNA of what you have always done? And done is the operative word, right? And what that means that you have to, that you can be depended on, trusted to do in the future. I think what we often run into is like what people have said all along, but has that often aligned with what they've done all along? And so I think that that's what has been some of the elements that we both have been able to lean into as we've built our purpose and thought about authenticity, and also where we've had to challenge ourselves. Because there are some elements of like, we can say, yes, we feel really good that this has consistently been something that we've done. But this is also something we know that we've been saying that hasn't been as consistent. And so now how do we challenge ourselves to bring that more specifically to the forefront so that it can actually be a core value and that we can feel truly authentic in that? I think the last piece is when you're building things that are for specific audiences, make sure you build it with those audiences. Can't get more authentic than that. So that's going to be my my sign offs, and I know Eden's got some great words to say here as well.
Thank you, Karla. That's an amazing way to end in terms of authenticity. We appreciate your time today. So Eden, I see a couple of questions popping into the chat right now, but before, I think we have 10 more minutes. So before we go to some of those questions, I do want you to share your words of wisdom. I mean, Karla, I mean, for me, she literally summed up my entire career, right? I've been in the market 18 years. I'm constantly talking about the power of the what meets the where, and what it means to truly be authentic to this consumer, and making sure that we're showing up in terms of that across the spectrum, right? So from our talent to the insight that drove our messaging and how we choose to talk to them. But I'd like to open it up to you to have you share your words of wisdom on that topic, and then maybe we can take some of the questions from the chat.
Okay, sounds good. So yeah, I'm completely aligned with what Karla said. I think that you have to involve, you know, this community in everything that you're doing, when you're, you know, thinking about marketing to them. I think it's so important to have the insights from the community to make sure that they're, you know, in front of the marketing campaign as well as behind the campaign, right? So I think for us, we actually came up with a campaign last year called It Comes Naturally, where we worked with 6 Black, you know, African-American creatives. You know, we worked with 2 polycultural agencies during it. And, you know, our team is predominantly African-American women, right? So we knew that we were being authentic because we were the consumer. We partnered with the consumer. You know, we had the consumer working on what we were putting out, so that by the time it landed to the consumer, you know, we knew that there wasn't going to be any surprises. We knew that we had a winning formula and a winning strategy, and it's been doing extremely well. So I think it's super important to, you know, keep that core community involved in the process as much as possible when you're creating for them or when you're marketing to them. I also think that you have to like meet the shopper and the consumer where she or he is, right? So I think that there's so many different interesting, you know, places where people are. So whether it's like new forms of social media, like, you know, TikTok and Clubhouse, or if it's just events that they go to that are, you know, Shea Moisture used to be at Essence Festival, we're at Afropunk, we're everywhere where we know our consumer is. So it's making sure that you're also creating that brand awareness and showing up in the places where you're able to interact with your consumer in a one-to-one way.
I love it. I love it. I couldn't agree more. Eden, there seems to be a theme bubbling up in the chat right now. So I'll try to sum up 2 questions in one. How is Shea Moisture, you know, just recognizing the importance of the male consumer, and really, I mean, I love the fact that you landed that in terms of the pandemic, because that was something that I saw personally. I was like, where are all my body scrubs going? And I realized that my husband's taking these like long-winded baths, you know, and like creating this new regimen. But keeping that in mind and your focus, how are the strategies differing between the two? So how you're going after the male consumer versus the female?
You know, honestly, I don't think the strategies are that different, other than the fact that they just want something that is, you know, I think that before when we looked at men's strategy, it was like, let's take the women's shampoo, put a male male scent on it and call it a men's shampoo, right? And that doesn't work. They have different needs, they have different performance that they want for their products. And I think that we also are marketing to them in a very specific way. So we have a SheaMoisture men's page. So we're also talking about issues that are relevant to men and Black men in particular, right? So we launched a really powerful campaign called, My Story, My Power, where we had Black men being vulnerable, right? And you don't typically see that in media. So I think that we're also able to resonate with them. And we were also able to understand that, a lot of men were using these like 5-in-1 products. I think I saw a meme around this where it's like they'll have a 5-in-1 product that does everything. And guess what? That product probably isn't doing all 5 jobs super well. And they wanted, I think that we used to think of the male consumer as being just someone that wanted a very simple solution. And that's actually not the case. They actually want to buy 4 or 5 products. So we did a lot of insights work. We partnered with a lot of our male consumers to understand what they're looking for, create product that worked for them, tested it. And, we've seen the results come in really, really strong in terms of our recent launches. I also think that there's an easement in terms of grooming and what is seen as respectable in the workplace, right? And I think that's also helped a lot too. You didn't see a lot of men wearing beards or having long facial hair or growing out their hair too. And now they are, and it's more acceptable. So I think that because of that, men are also now only learning how to take care of their hair and their facial hair, right? If they never had those things, they weren't really worried about it. So I think there's also this, it's almost like the naturals movement that happened for women is now happening for men.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I know, just spending so much time in the CPG space and beauty space myself. I even think back 10 years, and I remember the big insight being that men were going for female products because they didn't believe in the efficacy. All consumers are smart,
Right.
So I love the fact that you've been able to really elevate that consumer, and specifically deliver on his needs. We have a few more minutes left. So I'd love to open it up to one question, because I know this has come up a lot within the marketplace during the pandemic. Did you see any type of growth spikes specific to e-commerce? I know you talked a lot about leaning into virtual as part of your strategy. How did that really pay off for Shea?
Yeah, so our e-commerce, we saw like triple-digit growth in e-commerce, honestly. It was insane. I think that everyone has gone through kind of a digital transformation. And so for us, we have our direct-to-consumer website. We're also on, a lot of retailer.com sites at all the major retailers, and like Amazon is also a big place for us. I think for us, what we had to realize pretty quickly is that when you're shopping online, it's very different than when you're in store. So the assets and the information that's required online, we had to ramp up pretty quickly and work with our amazing creative team to really think about, how can we land all of the product, ingredients and all of the formulations and all of the things that the products can do online. How can we create video content? Video content does really well online, right? So when you have those usage videos and, how can we leverage UGC and influencer content and repost them onto some of our e-commerce sites? So it's been definitely a big transformation. The e-commerce team and the creative team has really stepped up a lot during this period. I think that we're probably going to see continued growth, maybe not at the same levels, but I think that e-commerce is definitely here to stay. And as more and more consumers feel comfortable shopping online for their personal care, we will continue to see growth in this space.
I have to make one other point, just building on what you said. Same thing on my end. I mean, just bringing the two worlds together, the influencer plus the e-commerce. I mean, if there's anything to take away today, that's definitely something that I see carrying forward into 2021, and something that, if it's done right, again, leaning into authenticity with our audiences, can be super powerful within the space. We have about 1 minute left. I want to take it to a little bit of a personal space, Eden, just knowing that we're coming off of International Women's Day, and knowing that within the Latinx and just polycultural Latinx, Black consumer, polycultural consumers, that because there is this sense of collectivism, right? There's power in numbers, that for each of us, as we take a step forward, we do lend a hand back to our community. So I just wanted to know, for you, what has been your personal inspiration, and how are you paying that back, Eden?
Yeah, so my family is from Eritrea. They immigrated here in the 80s, and I was born here in the US. And I was raised by my maternal grandmother, and my mom and my aunts have been just very strong kind of female forces in my life. So I've always been inspired by them and their strength and their resilience. And so for me, I've been able to just, I feel like I've worked really hard, but, had a lot of opportunities by being here. And I want to make sure that the people behind me have those same opportunities. So whenever there's an opportunity to partner with Black women, I will always, make that call. I will always, try to support younger women within the organization. I mentor a lot of women outside of the organization. And I hope that by me, being on these panels and sharing my story, that more women can see people that look like them that are in these positions and can be inspired.
That's amazing. I think we're at time. I see Pearl popping up. But I have to say I loved your last point in terms of the more that we're seen, the more that we're heard, and the more impact we're going to drive. And I do want to just put out there to the audience, building off of the last session, please support the Black Media Institute. Those are up and coming journalists within the space, and they can use I would say the support across all areas of focus, whether it's through leaning into them for their services or even helping to elevate them within their mission. And I think that's it. Thank you so much, Eden. This has been absolutely amazing. We were part of the same family under Unilever, but I service the other end of the spectrum. So this was an absolutely amazing experience for me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stacey, for being a great moderator. And I look forward to working with you and seeing you in the future.
Sounds